Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. I stood in my kitchen that morning, letting my fingertips trace the cold edge of the granite countertop. The hum of the refrigerator felt louder than usual. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was the weight of everything it took to get here, to this house. This life. This moment where things finally felt steady for so long. Steady didn't exist for me. It was just me and Chase bouncing between tiny apartments, stretching every dollar I had. I remember nights spent sitting on a worn-out couch, staring at bills I couldn't pay, praying he wouldn't notice how scared I was, but he always noticed. Even as a little boy, Chase could see right through me. He'd crawl into my lap, wrap his arms around me, and tell me it was going to be okay. And somehow, it always was. Chase's father was gone before his first birthday. No big fight, no dramatic exit, just a man who slipped out of our lives and never looked back. I used to wonder if I'd see parts of him in Chase as he grew up, but Chase was different. He didn't have the same coldness or the need to run. He stayed. We stayed. We didn't have much space back then. It was impossible to keep secrets when the walls were so thin, so we never tried. We talked about everything. I answered his questions no matter how awkward they were, and he shared things with me most kids would hide from their parents. That's just how it had to be. We relied on each other, and I think that closeness stuck, even as he got older and bigger. God, he got so big. I never felt like I was losing him while his friends were out getting into trouble. Chase was home with me. He liked hanging out, talking, making jokes that were so bad they made me laugh anyway. And I liked it too. I liked having him close, maybe too much sometimes. I think that's part of why I threw myself into fitness. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about feeling strong, like I could handle whatever came next. I started running every morning, lifting weights, and finally taking care of myself the way I deserved to. And it worked. I felt better, I looked better, people noticed. I noticed that confidence did something to me. It made me want more than just survival. So I bought this house, the one with space, light and quiet, and I promised myself I wouldn't feel guilty about it. I deserved it. Chase deserved it then. I bought the hot tub. It felt a little ridiculous at first, spending that much money on something so extra, but after everything I'd been through, it felt right. I told Chase about it before I ordered it, and he just smiled and told me to treat myself. I didn't think he'd care much about it, but I cared. The first night it was set up, I sat in it until my fingers were prunes. It felt like proof that I made it. By the weekend, I was dying to share it with Chase. I kept hinting at how good it felt, telling him it had helped his muscles after the gym. He kept brushing it off, saying he probably wouldn't use it. But when I asked one more time after dinner, he finally said yes. That should have been it. Just a fun little moment with my son. But when I pulled out my bikini that night, something felt off. Not wrong, just different. I checked myself in the mirror longer than usual, adjusted the straps, smoothed my hair, told myself I was just excited about the hot tub. It was silly to think anything else. Still, my hands felt a little unsteady when I carried our drinks outside. The night felt warmer than usual, even with the breeze. I carried 2 glasses outside, careful not to spill, and resumed my knitting. Waves of Steward wand flooded in. I hadn't noticed that my hands were contracting, set them on the edge of the hot tub. Chase was already waiting, leaning back against the smooth shell of the tub like he'd been doing this his whole life. He looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a while. Shoulders loose, eyes half lifted. "Told you it would be nice," I said. Stepping out of my sandals and tugging at the knot of my robe, I let it slide off my shoulders, revealing the black bikini I'd picked out earlier. His eyes flicked up for a split second, then back down to the bubbling water. I pretended not to notice and dipped my toes in. "I'll admit, it's better than I thought," he said, swirling his drink. "But I'm keeping this spot. Feels like the jets are in the perfect place." Oh, really? I lowered myself into the water and leaned back, letting the heat wrap around me. Well, don't get too comfortable, that's my spot, and I plan on taking it back. You snooze, you lose, he shot back, grinning. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling too. It had been a while since we'd sat like this, just talking, laughing, and unwinding. It reminded me of the nights he used to spend on the couch watching old sitcoms. His feet always creeping onto my side until I gave up and let him stretch out. Only this felt different. Maybe it was the heat, or the way the water made every movement slower, heavier. Maybe it was the way his shoulders filled out his side of the tub like he barely fit. Fine. He decided it was time for him to spend an all-encompassing moment with me. I said, scooting closer. If you're not moving, then let me see what's so great about this spot. We switched seats and I immediately regretted it. The jets hit all the right spots. Lower back, shoulders, legs. He gave me a look like he knew exactly what he'd given up. Told you, he said. Taking another sip? You're not getting it back now. Want to bet? I leaned over, pretending to grab his arm, but he pulled away, laughing. Before I knew it, we were wrestling, water splashing over the edges as I grabbed at his arm and he swatted my hands away. All right, he said, holding his drink up to keep it safe. You win. Just sit down already. Gladly, I said, and without thinking, I sank onto his lap. The laughter stopped. The air shifted. I felt it immediately, the firmness pressing against me, the slight tension in his body. My heart stuttered, but I didn't move. Neither did he. I told myself it was nothing. Heat and water and too much closeness, that's all it was. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I shifted, trying to get comfortable, but the more I moved, the more obvious it became. Sorry, he said suddenly, his voice slow and shaky. I didn't mean to. It's fine. I cut him off, trying to sound casual. It's just the jets. Relax. He didn't look relaxed. His face was red and he couldn't meet my eyes. I felt a flicker of guilt, but underneath it, something else. Excitement? I liked the way he looked at me. Then nervous and unsure, like I had some kind of power I didn't know I had until that moment. I said, breaking the silence, this wouldn't have happened if you just gave me my seat back. He laughed, and the tension eased, but it didn't disappear. He slid out from under me, muttering something about needing another drink, and climbed out of the tub. I watched him go, my eyes trailing lower than they should have, and when he disappeared inside, I let out a shaky breath. What was that? I leaned back against the edge, my body still buzzing. Maybe it was harmless, or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way he felt under me, the way his eyes widened before he looked away. It made me feel alive. By the time he came back out, the moment had passed, but my thoughts hadn't. I kept replaying it, questioning it, wondering if it was as innocent as I told myself it was, or if it was something else entirely. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. I know this hasn't been the easiest story to hear, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you find this video interesting, or if you think there's someone who could relate to what I'm sharing, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing stories like this and lets me know I'm not alone out here. Let's get back to it. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird moment. Heat drinks and too much time in a tiny tub, that's all it was. But the next morning, I woke up replaying it in my head, the way he looked at me, nervous, embarrassed, and maybe something else. And the way I felt, giddy, flattered, and curious. I didn't plan to tease him. Not at first, but the idea lingered, tempting me. It started small, just wearing a tank top with no bra while I made breakfast. He didn't say anything, but I caught him looking, a quick glance, barely noticeable, but enough to send a thrill through me. That thrill turned into a habit. Leggings replaced sweatpants. Low-cut tops replaced IES. I bent over to grab things more often, stretched longer when I knew he was watching, and found reasons to walk past him just a little closer than necessary. I told myself it was harmless, just a game, but the more I played the more I liked it. By the time Christmas rolled around, things felt different. The air between us was heavier charged. It wasn't just the outfits or the glances anymore. It was the jokes, the way he teased me back, pushing just enough to see how far I'd let it go. "Careful, Mom," he said one night as I leaned over the couch and leggings and a tank top. "You're going to make someone stay?" "Oh, please," I shot back, rolling my eyes. "You think after 20 years you'd be used to me by now? Doesn't mean I'm blind." That stopped me. He said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal, but it was. I felt my stomach flip, and I turned away before he could see my face. The hot tub came up again after dinner one night. I didn't even have to ask. This time he grabbed drinks and towels before I could say a word. I picked a pink bikini smaller than the one I wore last time and waited for him outside. When he stepped in, his eyes flicked down, just for a second, but it was enough to make me smile. "Jesus, Mom," he said, handing me my drink. "You're about to fall out of that thing." "Oh, stop." I laughed, sinking into the water. "I wouldn't want to traumatize you. It'd be more traumatizing for you, trust me." The words hung there, heavier than the steam, rising off the water. I didn't push, and neither did he, but the tension was there, pulsing between us. I joked about switching seats again, and he immediately shot it down. "No way," he said. "Not after last time." "What happened last time?" I pressed. "Tilting my head, you know," he said, his face turning red, deciding to join the party. I laughed, maybe a little too much. "I'm flattered." He turned even redder, and I let it drop. But later, when he climbed out, and I caught a glimpse of him through his wet shorts. That same thrill hit me all over again after Christmas. I found another excuse to push things. A saya I'd ordered as a gift to myself. Chase offered to set it up, and I made sure to stay close while he worked. I stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame in a crop top and shorts, and watched him tighten screws. "Ah, Mr. Handyman," I said, trailing my fingers down his arm. "How will I ever repay you?" He laughed it off, but I saw the way his eyes dipped to my legs before he turned back to the instruction. I let it hang there just long enough before backing off when he finished building it the next day. I asked if he wanted to try it out with me. He hesitated, but then I said, "Come on, you built it. You should at least enjoy it." That did the trick. I wore shorts and a tank top with no bra, just enough to keep the game going. He showed up in gym shorts, no shirt, looking more like a man than the boy we squeezed into the saya, sitting so close our legs brushed, and I felt my pulse pick up. "You've done such a great job in here," I said, leaning back. "Are you sure there's nothing more I could do?" "Well," he said, grinning, "I do have a big problem you could take care of." I blinked, caught off guard, but before I could say anything, he waved it off. "Kidding. I was kidding." "Oh, I thought our visitor came back," I teased, glancing at his shorts. His eyes flicked to my chest. "Just for a second, but enough to make my skin prickle." "Well, you're not the only one with visitors," he shot back, nodding at my nipples, pressing against the thin fabric. I pushed my chest forward, smiling. "It's natural after a workout." The timer dinged, breaking the moment. He stood up first, and I followed, brushing against him as we stepped out. He didn't move away. "Maybe I'll work out with you next time," he said, grinning. "I'd love that," I replied, but the words felt heavier than they should have. I went to bed that night feeling restless. Part of me wanted to stop, draw a line, and go back to normal, but another part wanted to see how far I could push before something snapped. I didn't mean to bring it up, at least not the way it happened. But after everything, the teasing, the SAA, the looks, I couldn't ignore it anymore, and neither could he. It started in the kitchen. I was rinsing dishes, still in my tank top and shorts from a morning workout, when Chase came up behind me. His hand brushed my lower back as he reached for a glass, and I felt it just enough pressure to tell me it wasn't an accident. I froze for half a second, heat rushing to my face, but I didn't pull away. "Your headlights are on," he said, nodding at my chest with a smirk. "Oh, you noticed!" I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. Kind of hard not to. That's when it happened. He hesitated, like he was trying to find the right words, and then asked, casual, but not really, what he was allowed to say. What was okay, and what wasn't. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He was asking for permission, testing the waters. And I couldn't pretend anymore that this was all in my head. Words don't matter, I said finally. Say whatever you want. If something crosses a line, we'll just call it a bad joke and move on. He seemed relieved, but also nervous. I could tell his mind was racing, so I pushed a little more. What about touching? I asked. What's okay with that? He paused, swallowing hard. I don't know. I'm fine with hands, I said, meeting his eyes, but only on my butt, and only if I can do the same. He laughed, sharp and nervous, but he nodded. Deal. I told myself it was innocent, just a silly agreement between two people who'd always been close, but the moment felt heavier than that. My stomach flipped as I turned back to the dishes, pretending I didn't feel his eyes still on me. It didn't take long before we tested it later that night. I was loading the dishwasher when I felt his hand brush against my hip, quick but deliberate. I straightened up, startled, and bumped right into him. He didn't back away. Instead, he pressed, just enough that I could feel him, and I looked up at him with wide eyes. Someone's feeling bold, I said, my voice lower than I meant it to be. You said it was okay, he shot back. But his face was red, and it is. I smirked and turned away, but the heat didn't fade, not even after he left to meet up with friends that night. I went through my closet, pulling out skirts, dresses, and tops I hadn't worn in years. I wanted him to notice. I wanted to keep pushing. And the next morning, I did just that. I came downstairs in one of my shortest skirts and a blouse with no bra, just enough buttons undone to leave things to the imagination. He was already in the kitchen, still in his boxers, and when he turned around, his jaw actually dropped. Is that for me? He asked, half joking but still staring. I figured my outfit should match yours, I teased, stepping closer. He grinned, but I saw the shift in his eyes. He wasn't joking anymore. He let his hand brush my lower back as he walked past, and I leaned into it just enough to let him know I liked it. The next few days were more of the same, small touches, lingering looks, and laments that danced right on the edge of what we both knew was too far. He got bolder, and so did I. You're going to get me in trouble, he said one night after. I bent over in front of him to grab something off the floor. I shot back, straightening up and turning to face him. Careful, he warned, but his voice didn't sound careful. It sounded excited. By the end of the week, it wasn't just comments or accidental touches anymore. It was hugs that lasted too long, brushing past each other in hallways when there was plenty of space, his hands lingering on my hips when he reached around me to grab something, and every time it happened, I felt the same thrill, the same rush of heat and curiosity that made me want more. But we always pulled back. We'd laugh it off, make a joke, and pretend nothing had happened. I think we were both scared of what it meant, what it could turn into if we didn't stop. But neither of us wanted to stop. Not yet. I don't know what's happening, he admitted one night as we sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV. Me neither, I said, but it feels good. Yeah, he said, staring at the screen, but not really seeing it. It does. We left it at that, no promises, no decisions, just an unspoken agreement to keep going, to keep teasing, to see where it would lead. And as much as I told myself I'd keep it playful, I couldn't help but wonder how long we'd be able to hold back. I didn't expect it to happen that night. It wasn't planned, but maybe that's what made it impossible to stop. We were sitting in the living room, just the two of us. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. My legs were stretched out, resting across his lap, and he was absent-mindedly tracing circles on my ankle. It wasn't the first time we'd sat like that, but this time felt different. He wasn't joking or teasing, neither was I. I could feel the tension building, thick and heavy, but neither of us said a word, not until Chase finally exhaled, breaking the silence. I don't get it, he said, quietly. Get what? I asked, even though I already knew. This us. I don't get what's happening, and it's freaking me out. I pulled my legs back, sitting up to face him. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands gripping his knees like he was trying to steady himself. "You're not the only one," I admitted. My voice felt too loud, even though it was barely a whisper. "I've been trying to figure it out too." He finally looked at me then, and there was something raw in his eyes, something that made my stomach twist. "It's not just me, right?" he asked. "I mean, I'm not imagining it." "No," I said, "you're not." We sat in that silence again, but this time it was worse. It felt dangerous, like one wrong word would send everything crashing down. I should have ended it there, laughed it off, changed the subject, but I didn't want to. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Every time I see you, it's like, I don't know, I can't stop thinking about it, about you." My breath caught, and for a second, I couldn't speak. But when I finally did, the words came out before I could stop them. "You're not the only one," I said again. "It's been the same for me." His eyes widened, like he wasn't expecting me to say it out loud. Hell, I wasn't expecting me to say it out loud, but once it was out there, I couldn't take it back. "I don't know what to do with it," he said, his voice quieter now. "It's messing with my head. Half the time I feel like I need to leave the room just to stop thinking about you." And the other half, he trailed off, but I knew exactly what he meant. My skin burned and my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I should have told him to stop, that we couldn't keep doing this, but I didn't. "It scares me too," I said instead. But it also, I hesitated, scared to finish the thought, but I couldn't lie, not to him and not to myself. "It makes me feel alive," I admitted. The words hung there, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then Chase leaned back, letting his head fall against the couch. "God, Mom." He dragged his hands down his face and then looked at me again. "What the hell are we doing?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I don't want to stop." He looked at me like he was searching for something. Permission, maybe? Or reassurance that he wasn't crazy, but all I could give him was the truth. "We'll keep it light," I said softly, "just like we talked about before. Nothing serious, no expectations, and if it gets too far, we stop." He nodded, but I could still see the conflict in his eyes. If I was being honest, I felt it too. I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep pretending it was just teasing, but for now, I needed this. I needed the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel. "I should go to bed," he said suddenly, standing up and running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," I said, but neither of us moved. He lingered for just a second longer, like he was waiting for me to stop him, but I didn't. And when he finally walked away, I was left alone with my thoughts, wondering if this thing between us was already too far gone. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation over and over until the edges of it blurred. Part of me felt relief, like a weight had been lifted now that everything was out in the open, but another part felt heavier than ever. I'd crossed a line, even if only in my head, and I didn't know how to uncross it. The next morning, I found Chase in the kitchen. He was already dressed, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee. He looked up when I walked in. For a moment, neither of us said anything, but there was no tension. Not like the night before, just quiet. "Morning," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Morning." I grabbed a mug and filled it, trying to keep my hands steady. I could feel him watching me, and it made my pulse quicken. But this time I didn't let it show. "Not this time. About last night," he started, but I cut him off. "We need to talk." I turned to face him, setting my cup down. "But we also need to be honest with ourselves." He nodded, but he looked nervous, like he wasn't sure what I was going to say. Honestly, I wasn't sure either. But I knew we couldn't keep pretending nothing was happening. That much was clear. "I can't lose you," I said. "No matter what, you won't," he said quickly, stepping closer. "I swear. But we can't keep doing this. Whatever this is." My voice wavered, but I pushed through. "It's messing with both of us, and I can't let it get to a point where we can't come back from it." "So, what do we do?" he asked, and his voice cracked just enough to make my heart ache. "We set boundaries. Real ones this time." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep eye contact. No more touching, no more teasing. And if either of us starts feeling like we're crossing a line, we say something right then. No brushing it off. He nodded slowly, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He didn't want to let go of this, whatever it was between us. And part of me didn't either. But I knew we had to. And, Chase, I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I need you to know this has nothing to do with how I feel about you. You make me feel alive, seen, and I'll never forget that. But this can't be the way I find that feeling again. I need to figure out what's missing in my life outside of this house, outside of us. His shoulders relaxed, just a little, and for the first time in days, I saw the boy I raised, the one who trusted me, leaned on me, and looked up to me. Not the man who'd been looking at me like I was someone new. I get it, he said, squeezing my hand back. I feel the same, I didn't know how to say it. We'll be okay, I said, and I meant it, but we need to make sure we keep it that way. He pulled me into a hug then, tight and familiar like all the ones before, but when he pulled away, something felt different, lighter, like we'd finally let go of the tension that had been tying us up for weeks. Later, after he left to meet some friends, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself, not just at my body, but at everything else. The softness in my eyes, the way my hair fell around my shoulders, the way my skin seemed to glow even without makeup. For the first time in years, I felt beautiful, desirable, and it wasn't because of Chase, not really. It was because he'd reminded me what it felt like to be noticed. I promised myself then that I wouldn't let that feeling fade. I'd find ways to keep it alive through new experiences, new people, and maybe even a new relationship. When I was ready, but it wouldn't be through him. It couldn't be. When Chase came home later that night, we fell back into our usual routine, dinner, TV, casual conversation. And for the first time, it felt easy again, comfortable, like we'd found our way back to each other, even if we'd lost something along the way. Still, as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if we'd let it go further? What if we'd crossed that line, and what if the part of me that wanted to know never really went away? I'm not sure where this leaves me, but I know it's complicated. That's why I'm sharing this. Maybe someone out there has insight. I haven't thought of if you face something like this or know someone who has. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Sometimes it's hard to see clearly when you're in the middle of it, and if nothing else, let this be a reminder. Loneliness can pull you places you never expected to go. Pay attention before you cross a line you can't come back from. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Your thoughts matter, so feel free to share them.